Hello, dear students. Welcome again to our course English for Science and Technology. Today we're tackling review of relative clauses. By the end of this session, you're going to be able to write relative clauses of both types, defining and non-defining. You're going to be able to recognize the relative and the main clause in a sentence and identify the relative word that introduces these clauses. So in relative clause, like subordinate clauses, there is a relative clause, which is the subordinate, and we have the main clause or the independent clause that can stand alone. You're also going to be able to distinguish relative pronouns from relative adverbs. Together we call them relative words. As we have two types of relative clauses, we also have to differentiate between them. Restrictive, also known as defining, or non-restrictive, also called non-defining. Finally, you will be able to write or compose restrictive relative clauses or non-restrictive relative clauses using your own words. Let's dive right in, starting with an example. Windows 7 that I'm currently using is outdated. Where's the relative clause and where is the main clause or independent clause? The relative clause is that I'm currently using. It is relative because it starts with the relative pronoun that. We generally use relative clauses in order to clarify, add information without repeating words. The two simple sentences that we combined into one relative clause are Windows 7 is outdated. I'm currently using Windows 7. Where is the repetition in those two simple sentences? Windows 7 is repeated twice. In order to eliminate a repetition, we replace Windows 7 for the second time with the relative pronoun that refers back to Windows 7 in order not to write it twice. So the relative pronoun is placed right after the noun it modifies. Another example goes as follows. John, who is our computing teacher, developed a new programming package. The relative clause in this sentence is who's our computing teacher. We join the two simple sentences. John is our computing teacher and John developed a new programming package, eliminating the repetition of John and adding extra information. And we said John, who is our computing teacher, developed a new programming package. Relative clauses modify a noun or a pronoun. That's why they are placed immediately after the noun or pronoun they modify. Relative words are of two types. We have relative pronouns, which are who, whom, whose, which, or that, and relative adverbs, which are when, where, and why. Let's start explaining each individually. The relative pronoun who refers to the subject of the sentence, and the subject has to be a person, like the teacher. The teacher explained the lesson. The teacher was very kind. If we join those two simple sentences, adding extra information and not repeating the same word, I say the teacher who explained the lesson was very kind. But if it's not the subject yet human, we use whom. Whom refers to the object of the clause, but it is a human being like the student. Whom can be replaced with simply who. I helped the student passed the exam. The student in the first simple sentence is the object. So I say the student whom I helped passed the exam. Who is a substitute to whom, so I can also say the student who I helped pass the exam. That is completely fine. It is a correct sentence. Whose shows possession or ownership for people, animals, or things. She is a writer. Her books are famous worldwide. The books belong to this writer, so I combine those two sentences showing belongingness using the relative pronoun his, which shows possession. Then I have the full sentence. She is the writer whose books are famous worldwide. By this I added important information and I eliminated repetition, which refers to animals, things, or ideas, and it replaces subject or object. Instead of saying who, which is for humans, I say which is for animals, things, or ideas. I bought a laptop last year. The laptop is still very fast. Laptop is non-human, it is a thing, so I join the sentences with which. The laptop which I bought last year is still very fast. That can be used to refer back to all of the previously mentioned except for whose, which is for possession. That refers back to people, animals, things, or ideas. What's special about that is that it introduces important information. That's why it is called restrictive clause or defining clause. It is very necessary. This is one type of the clauses. We're going to discuss types of clauses in a moment. He drives a car. The car is very expensive. Car is a thing. So I say the car which he drives is very expensive, as I can say the car that he drives is very expensive. You can use it when you're not sure whether this noun or pronoun is a thing or a person. When is used for time or it refers back to time. I'll never forget that day. We first met on that day. That day refers back to time. I'll never forget the day when we first met. Where refers to place. This is the cafe. We had our first dates in this cafe. Cafe is not coffee. Cafe is the place where we have drinks. This is the cafe where we had our first date. Now we're left with only why, which refers to reason. I don't know the reason. She left early for that reason. We can express it in a myriad of ways, but what's essential is that I use why for referring back to reason. I don't know the reason why she left early. Relative clauses function as subordinate clauses. They cannot stand alone as full sentences. They need another simple sentence, which is called the main clause, to have a full meaningful sentence in English. The relative pronoun or adverb is used to connect the relative clause to an independent clause by referring to the noun or pronoun being modified. The relative word is placed immediately after this noun or pronoun it is modifying. Windows 7 that I'm currently using is outdated. That refers back to Windows 7. Who refers back to John. Punctuation differs between these two sentences. In sentence 1, we put no punctuation. In sentence 2, which starts with John, we have the relative clause put between two commas. Let's talk about punctuation and when do we have to put the relative clause between two commas. There are two types of relative clauses. Defining relative clauses, also called restrictive. A defining relative clause is a clause which is essential in the sentence. It conveys meaning that it cannot be omitted. When you want to introduce information that is core to understanding the sentence, very important information, without it, we would not really understand your sentence or interpret it into different meaning. This is called defining or restrictive. It is very important. Non-defining relative clauses are also known as non-restrictive. They give extra information, more information. So this information is additional to the understanding of the sentence. So it is optional. We can omit it. That's why we put the relative clause that is non-defining or non-restrictive between two commas to indicate that this is a detail additional for clarity of the sentence.